The crystal chandeliers of the Golden Palace restaurant cast dancing shadows across the faces of Lagos's most influential business elite as they gathered for the annual Chamber of Commerce dinner. Among them sat Frederick James, a man whose arrogance was as tailored as his expensive Armani suit. His thick fingers drummed impatiently against the white tablecloth as he surveyed the room, mentally calculating the net worth of everyone present. Beside him, Rosalind James sat quietly, her elegant navy dress a stark contrast to her husband's ostentatious gold watch and diamond cufflinks. She had learned long ago that these events were Frederick's stage, and she was merely part of the backdrop. Her soft features bore the subtle marks of years spent walking on eggshells, yet there was something in her dark eyes, a flicker of intelligence that Frederick had never bothered to notice. "Another boring evening with these pretentious fools," Frederick muttered under his breath, loud enough for Rosalind to hear, but not the neighboring tables. He took a generous gulp of the imported wine, his fourth glass of the evening. "At least the food better be worth it. I'm paying enough for this table." Rosalind simply nodded, her hands folded in her lap. She had stopped trying to engage Frederick in meaningful conversation years ago. Tonight, like every other public appearance, she would smile when expected, laugh at his crude jokes, and endure whatever verbal ammunition he decided to launch in her direction. The evening's host, Chief Adebayo, a distinguished man in his 60s, approached their table with a warm smile. "Frederick, good to see you, my friend. And the beautiful Mrs. James," he said, taking Rosalind's hand gently. "You look radiant as always." Frederick's chest puffed with misplaced pride. "Yes, well, I keep her well maintained," he said with a laugh that made Rosalind's stomach turn. "Like a good car, you know? Regular maintenance, occasional upgrades." His eyes gleamed with malicious humor as he gestured toward his wife like she was an object on display. Chief Adebayo's smile faltered slightly, but he maintained his composure. "I was actually hoping to speak with Mrs. James about the new children's foundation she's been working with. I hear wonderful things about your initiatives, my dear." Before Rosalind could respond, Frederick waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, that little hobby of hers. Playing with orphans and pretending to be important. I humor her, you know. Keeps her busy while I handle the real business." His voice carried across the immediate area, drawing uncomfortable glances from nearby diners. Rosalind's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she remained silent. This wasn't the first time Frederick had belittled her volunteer work, though doing it so publicly felt like a new low. She had poured her heart into helping underprivileged children access education, but to Frederick, it was merely a distraction from her primary job of being his trophy wife. "Actually," Chief Adebayo interjected gently, "the foundation has been quite successful. I heard they've built 3 new schools this year alone." Frederick's laugh was harsh and grating. "Schools? Please." Rosalind couldn't organize a children's birthday party without help, let alone build schools. "I think you have her confused with someone competent." He reached over and patted Rosalind's hand in a patronizing manner. "She means well, but let's be realistic about her capabilities." The words hit Rosalind like physical blows. Around them, conversations began to quiet as people strained to hear the uncomfortable exchange. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, watching, judging, pitying. Her husband's public humiliation was becoming entertainment for Lagos's elite. "Frederick," she whispered, hoping to redirect his attention. Perhaps you should let the adults talk." Frederick interrupted sharply, his voice rising. "See what I mean?" he said to Chief Adebayo, as if Rosalind wasn't sitting right there. "No business sense whatsoever. I've been trying to teach her for 15 years, but some people just aren't built for success." The entire section of the restaurant had fallen silent now. Servers paused in their duties, and even the background music seemed to fade. Frederick was oblivious to the discomfort he was causing, too intoxicated by wine and his own perceived superiority to notice the horrified expressions around him. "She's lucky I keep her around," Frederick continued, his voice growing louder and more slurred. "Any other man would have traded up years ago, but I'm loyal, you see. I stick with my investments, even the underperforming ones." He gestured toward Rosalind again, this time with less precision due to the alcohol. Rosalind felt tears threatening to spill, but she blinked them back. She had endured worse at home, behind closed doors, but this public degradation was testing her limits. She thought about leaving, simply standing up and walking out, but Frederick controlled all their finances. She had no car, no money of her own, nowhere to go. Chief Adebayo looked genuinely distressed. Frederick, perhaps nothing. Frederick slammed his glass down, causing wine to splash across the tablecloth. You people need to understand something. Success isn't handed out like charity. Some of us work for what we have, and others. He looked pointedly at Rosalind, others just ride the coattails. It was at that precise moment, as Frederick's cruelty reached its peak and the entire restaurant watched in stunned silence, that his phone began to ring. The sound cut through the tension like a knife, sharp and insistent. Frederick glanced at the screen, and for the first time that evening, his expression shifted slightly. "Excuse me," he said, his bravado wavering just a fraction. "I need to take this." He answered the call with his usual business tone, but as the voice on the other end began speaking, Frederick's face underwent a dramatic transformation. The smirk that had been permanently etched on his features slowly melted away, replaced by confusion, then disbelief, then something approaching terror. "What do you mean, investigate?" Frederick's voice cracked slightly. "There must be some mistake." The restaurant remained silent, but now everyone was watching Frederick instead of pitying Rosalind. His face had gone pale beneath his expensive tan, and beads of sweat were forming on his forehead despite the air conditioning. No, that's impossible," Frederick stammered into the phone. "The contracts were, everything was legitimate." His free hand began to tremble as he reached for his wine glass. Rosalind watched her husband's transformation with growing curiosity. In 15 years of marriage, she had never seen Frederick lose his composure like this. The man who had just been proclaiming his superiority to an entire restaurant was now shrinking before her eyes. "FCC." Frederick's voice rose to almost a squeak. "The Economic and Financial Crimes Commission? But we need to talk about this privately. You can't just..." The phone call continued for several more minutes, with Frederick's responses becoming increasingly desperate. He kept repeating phrases like misunderstanding and "we can work this out," while his face grew paler and his hands shook more violently. Finally, Frederick ended the call and sat staring at his phone as if it had bitten him. The restaurant remained silent, waiting. Chief Adebayo leaned forward with concern. "Frederick, is everything all right?" Frederick looked up, and Rosalind was shocked to see genuine fear in his eyes. The man who had spent the evening destroying her dignity was now completely deflated. The government thinks there might be some irregularities in my business practices." "What kind of irregularities?" Chief Adebayo asked gently. "Tax evasion, fraud, money laundering." Frederick's voice was barely above a whisper. "They're freezing all my accounts pending investigation. Everything. The businesses, the houses, the cars, everything." A collective gasp went up from the nearby tables. In Lagos's business community, EFCC investigations were serious matters that often led to lengthy prison sentences and financial ruin. Frederick James, who had just been boasting about his success and belittling his wife's intelligence, was potentially facing the complete destruction of his empire. But the surprises weren't over. As Frederick sat in stunned silence, trying to process his new reality, Rosalind's phone began to ring. She glanced at the screen and saw a number she recognized, one that made her heart race with anticipation rather than fear. "Excuse me," she said quietly, standing from the table. "I need to take this call." She walked a few steps away from the table, though in the silence of the restaurant, her conversation was clearly audible to everyone present. "Yes, this is Rosalind James," she said, her voice suddenly stronger and more confident than anyone at the table had ever heard it. "Yes, I've been expecting your call." Frederick looked up at his wife with confusion. When had Rosalind ever received important phone calls? When had she ever spoken with such authority? "The final papers are ready," Rosalind continued. "Excellent. Yes, I'll be able to sign them first thing Monday morning. And the first phase of funding has been approved? Wonderful. This will change everything for those children." As she spoke, Rosalind's entire demeanor transformed. Gone was the meek, submissive woman who had endured her husband's abuse. In her place stood someone confident, articulate, and clearly very much in control of whatever conversation she was having. "Oh, and please make sure the press release mentions that this is just the beginning," Rosalind said with a smile that no one at the restaurant had ever seen before. "We have much bigger plans for the future." She ended the call and returned to the table, where Frederick was staring at her with an expression of complete bewilderment. "Who was that?" he demanded, though his voice lacked its earlier authority. Rosalind sat down gracefully, smoothing her dress. For the first time all evening, she looked directly into her husband's eyes. "That was the Minister of Education's office. They've just approved my foundation's proposal for a nationwide educational initiative. We're receiving a grant of 2.5 billion naira to build 50 new schools across Nigeria." The restaurant erupted in shocked murmurs. Frederick's mouth fell open so wide that his drink could have fallen out. "But that's impossible," Frederick sputtered. "You don't know anything about. You can't possibly." "Oh, but I can," Rosalind said calmly. "You see, Frederick, while you've been dismissing my little hobby for the past 5 years, I've been building something real. Those 3 schools Chief Adebayo mentioned, they were just the beginning. I've been working with government officials, international donors, and education experts to develop a comprehensive program that will transform education for underprivileged children across Nigeria." Chief Adebayo was beaming now. "Rosalind, this is incredible news. I had heard rumors about a major educational initiative, but I had no idea you were behind it." "Few people did," Rosalind admitted. "I preferred to work quietly, to let the results speak for themselves rather than making grand announcements." Her eyes flicked meaningfully toward Frederick. "Unlike some people, I believe in substance over show." Frederick was struggling to process this information. His wife, his supposedly incompetent decoration of a wife, had just secured one of the largest educational grants in Nigerian history while he was facing potential prison time. "But how?" Frederick asked weakly. "How did you know how to? How did I know how to succeed?" Rosalind finished for him. "Perhaps because I have a master's degree in international development from Oxford University. Perhaps because before I married you, I worked for the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. Perhaps because I spent years building relationships with educators, politicians, and philanthropists while you were too busy belittling me to notice." The revelation hit Frederick like a physical blow. Oxford, UNESCO. In 15 years of marriage, he had never bothered to ask about his wife's background or qualifications. He had simply assumed she was the empty-headed beauty he wanted her to be. "You went to Oxford?" Frederick's voice was barely audible. "First-class honors," Rosalind confirmed. "I was also valedictorian at University of Lagos before that. But you never asked about my education, did you, Frederick? You were too busy telling everyone how lucky I was to have you." Chief Adebayo chuckled appreciatively. "Frederick, my friend, it seems you've been seriously underestimating your wife. Oxford, UNESCO, and now this incredible foundation work. You should be very proud." But Frederick wasn't proud. Frederick was devastated. As the reality of the situation sank in, he realized that while his own world was crumbling around him, his wife, the woman he had spent years humiliating and dismissing, was about to become one of the most influential education advocates in Nigeria. The foundation has also secured partnerships with several international organizations, Rosalind continued, her confidence growing with each revelation. "We'll be working with UNICEF, the British Council, and the Gates Foundation. The program will provide education for over 100,000 children in its first phase alone." The restaurant was now buzzing with excitement. People were congratulating Rosalind, shaking her hand, and asking about the foundation's work. Meanwhile, Frederick sat forgotten, his earlier humiliation of his wife now reflecting back on him tenfold. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, many stopped by the table to speak with Rosalind about her work. Business cards were exchanged, meetings were scheduled, and partnerships were discussed. Frederick might as well have been invisible. Finally, as they prepared to leave, Chief Adebayo pulled Frederick aside. "You know, my friend," he said quietly, "tonight you learned something very important. Success isn't about how loudly you boast or how much you belittle others. True success is about making a real difference in the world. Your wife understands that. Perhaps it's time you learned from her example." As they walked to their car, which, Frederick realized with growing panic, might be repossessed by morning, Rosalind finally broke the silence between them. "Frederick," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I want you to know that despite everything, I don't wish you ill. What's happening with your business troubles isn't my doing, and I hope you can resolve them legally and ethically." Frederick nodded numbly, too shocked to speak. "But I also want you to know," Rosalind continued, "that things are going to change between us. I've spent 15 years being the woman you wanted me to be. Quiet, submissive, grateful for your attention. But that woman was a lie. The real me is someone who builds schools and changes lives. The real me is someone who deserves respect, not humiliation." As they reached their car, Frederick finally found his voice. "Rosalind, I had no idea. All these years, I thought." "You thought what you wanted to think," Rosalind said, not unkindly. "But thinking and knowing are two different things. Tonight, you learned the difference." The drive home passed in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Frederick contemplated the ruin of his business empire and the discovery that his wife was a force he had never imagined. Rosalind planned her foundation's future and considered what her own future might hold. The next morning brought news that Frederick's assets had indeed been frozen and that he would be facing a lengthy investigation. The same newspapers that announced his downfall also featured front-page stories about Rosalind's educational initiative, hailing her as a visionary leader and champion of children's rights. As Frederick sat at their breakfast table, reading about his wife's triumph while contemplating his own potential imprisonment, he finally understood the true meaning of the evening's events. His public humiliation of Rosalind had backfired spectacularly, revealing not her inadequacies but his own blindness and arrogance. The phone call that had turned his smirk into silence had been just the beginning. The real revelation was that the woman he had spent years diminishing was, in fact, extraordinary, and that his greatest failure wasn't in his business practices, but in his failure to recognize the remarkable person who had been beside him all along. In the end, Frederick's attempt to publicly humiliate his wife had accomplished something he never intended. It had given Rosalind the perfect stage to reveal her true self to the world. And in doing so, she had shown everyone present, including Frederick himself, exactly who had been the real success story in their marriage all along.